They say blood is thicker than water, but apparently it's not thicker than greed. I learned this lesson on a crisp October morning when I discovered my childhood home was listed for sale online, complete with photos of rooms where I'd grown up, memories now priced by the square foot. I'm Ella, and until that moment, I thought family meant something sacred. Our grandmother's cottage, sitting on 3 acres of lakefront property, had been in our family for 4 generations. But to my brother Jake, it was just another asset to liquidate. The notification popped up on my phone while I was reviewing quarterly reports at my investment firm. Zillow alert, 3-bedroom lakefront cottage, asking price $400,000. My blood went cold as I recognized the wraparound porch where Grandma used to serve lemonade, the oak tree where Jake and I had built our treehouse. I clicked through the photos, each one a knife to my chest. The listing agent was Sandra Mills, the same realtor who'd helped our parents buy their retirement condo 5 years ago. My hands shook as I dialed Jake's number. Straight to voicemail. Of course. Jake, it's Ella. Call me back immediately. We need to talk about the cottage. I hung up and immediately called Sandra Mills Realty. Miss Mills speaking, how can I help you? Sandra, it's Ella Thompson. I need to know about the cottage listing on Maple Lake Road. There was a pause. Oh, Ella, honey. I tried to talk him out of it, but your brother insisted. He has power of attorney for the property since your grandmother's passing. Said it was too expensive to maintain. Too expensive to maintain? The cottage that generated $15,000 annually in rental income? The cottage that Jake had been collecting that income from for the past 2 years while I assumed it was sitting empty? I sat in my office 40 floors above the city, staring out at a view that cost more than most people's homes, and felt something cold settle in my chest. You said he has power of attorney? I said carefully. Can you send me a copy of those documents? Of course, dear. Though I should mention we already have several interested buyers. It's been on the market less than 24 hours. After hanging up, I called my attorney, Marcus Chen, who'd handled my grandmother's estate. Marcus, I need you to look into something immediately. The cottage shouldn't have been listed without my consent. There was rustling of papers on his end. Ella, I'm looking at the documents now. Your grandmother's will clearly states that both you and Jake must agree to any sale of the property. If he's claiming sole power of attorney, we have a problem. My phone buzzed with an email from Sandra. The power of attorney document was clearly forged, Jake's signature attempting to mimic our grandmother's handwriting on a form dated 3 months after her death. The arrogance was breathtaking. He'd assumed I was too busy with my career to pay attention to family business. He'd assumed wrong. I leaned back in my leather chair, watching the city spread out below me like a chessboard. Jake had always been the impulsive one, the dreamer who chased get-rich-quick schemes while I built my fortune through careful planning and strategic investments. But this time, his impulsiveness had handed me the perfect opportunity. I opened my laptop and began typing. Within an hour, I'd established a shell company, Clearwater Holdings LLC, and transferred sufficient funds for an all-cash offer. My assistant knocked and entered with afternoon coffee. Cancel my meetings for the rest of the week, I told her. I need to make a trip home. She nodded, already pulling out her phone to reschedule. Miss Thompson, should I book your usual hotel? No, I said, smiling for the first time that day. I have a feeling I'll be staying somewhere much more meaningful. The drive to Maple Lake took 3 hours through autumn countryside that blazed with color. Every mile brought back memories of childhood summers spent at the cottage, of Grandma teaching me to fish from the old dock, of Jake and me racing through the woods pretending to be explorers. Those memories felt precious now, fragile things I was determined to protect. I met Marcus at his office in town first. Everything's ready, he said, sliding documents across his desk. Clearwater Holdings is making an all-cash offer, 20% above asking price. Sandra says your brother was thrilled. He wants to close as soon as possible. Perfect. And the other matter? The forensic accountant finished her review this morning. Jake's been collecting rental income from the cottage for 26 months. Total amount, including what he owes in taxes he didn't pay, comes to $38,000. I signed the papers with steady hands. When do we close? Friday afternoon, Sandra's office, 2 o'clock. Jake thinks he's meeting an anonymous buyer from the city. His excitement was evident when she called him. The satisfaction I felt was cold and complete. Jake had always underestimated me, always assumed that because I was quiet and studious, I was somehow less capable. He was about to learn otherwise. That evening, I drove past the cottage. Jake's truck was in the driveway, and I could see him through the windows, probably cataloging what he wanted to take before the sale. The cottage looked exactly as I remembered: weathered cedar shingles and white trim, the dock extending into the lake where the sunset painted the water gold. Tomorrow, this would all be mine again, but tonight I had other preparations to make. I checked into the Lakeview Inn and spent the evening on the phone with contractors and service providers. The cottage would need updating after years of Jake's neglect, but the bones were good. Grandma had built it to last. I also made another call, this one to Jake's employer at the construction company where he'd worked sporadically over the years. The conversation was illuminating. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzly, perfect weather for what I had planned. I dressed carefully in a charcoal business suit, my hair pulled back severely, every inch the successful businesswoman I'd become. Marcus met me at Sandra's office at 1:45. "You sure about this?" he asked as we walked up the steps. "He's your brother, after all." "He stopped being my brother the moment he decided to steal from our family," I replied, checking my watch. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. Sandra's office was exactly as I remembered from helping my parents years ago, all brass fixtures and hunting prints. Jake was already there, wearing his best khakis and a button-down shirt that looked freshly ironed. He was practically bouncing in his chair, probably already spending the money in his head. When he saw me walk in behind Marcus, his face went through a series of expressions: confusion, surprise, suspicion. "Ella, what are you doing here?" I took the seat across from him, crossing my legs and placing my hands calmly in my lap. "I'm here for the closing, Jake." His eyes darted between me and Marcus. "What closing? You're not buying a house." Marcus opened his briefcase with theatrical precision, withdrawing a stack of documents. "Actually, Mr. Thompson, my client is indeed purchasing a house. This house." He slid the purchase agreement across the table. "Miss Ella Thompson, acting through Clearwater Holdings LLC, is the buyer." The color drained from Jake's face as he stared at the papers. "This is impossible. You don't have that kind of money." I smiled, the expression feeling sharp as winter wind. "Don't I?" "Jake, you've never paid attention to what I actually do for a living. You've been too busy spending money that wasn't yours to spend." Sandra cleared her throat uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should proceed with the closing. All the documents are in order and the funds have been verified." Jake stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I'm not signing anything. This is insane. You're trying to steal our family home." The irony wasn't lost on me. I remained seated, perfectly calm. "Jake, you listed the property for sale. You accepted an offer. The buyer is here with cash in hand. Unless you'd like to explain to everyone present why you forged documents claiming sole power of attorney." His face went white, then red, then white again. Marcus spread more papers on the table. "Speaking of which, we should address the matter of the rental income you've been collecting illegally for the past 2 years. The forensic accounting shows $38,000 in unreported income, plus applicable penalties and interest." Jake sank back into his chair. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Really?" I pulled out my phone and played a voicemail message. Jake's voice filled the room, leaving a message for a renter about late fees and property policies. The timestamp was from 6 months ago. Sandra shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Mr. Thompson, I think we need to resolve this matter before we can proceed." Jake's hands were shaking now. "Ella, please, we can work this out. We're family." "We were family," I corrected. "Family doesn't steal from each other.
Family doesn't forge legal documents. Family doesn't lie for 2 years about rental income. But you're right about one thing. We are going to work this out. Marcus handed him another set of documents. The sale will proceed as agreed. The proceeds, however, will be placed in a restricted trust. Mr. Thompson will receive access to the funds only after he's made full restitution for the illegally collected rental income, plus penalties. Until then, the money remains in trust. Jake stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. How much is full restitution? $52,000, Marcus replied. The original amount, plus interest and penalties for tax evasion. But the house is only selling for $400,000, Jake protested. After agent commissions and closing costs, I'll only net about $360,000. If I have to pay $52,000, that leaves me with barely over $300,000. I maintained my composure, though inside, I felt a grim satisfaction. You should have thought of that before you decided to steal from our family. The deal stands as written. Take it or leave it. But remember, if you don't take it, I withdraw my offer and you still owe the $52,000. Plus, I'll be filing criminal charges for the forged power of attorney.
The room fell silent, except for the tick of Sandra's antique clock on the wall. Jake stared at the documents, his dreams of easy money crumbling before his eyes. Outside, the rain began to fall harder, drumming against the windows. Finally, he picked up the pen. Where do I sign? Sandra guided him through the papers, her voice professionally neutral despite the tension in the room. When the last signature was complete, she handed me the keys to the cottage. The metal felt warm in my palm, solid and real. As we prepared to leave, Jake caught my arm. Ella, wait. I know you're angry, but we can work this out. We're the only family each other has left. I looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the desperation in his eyes. Jake, for 2 years, you let me believe the cottage was sitting empty while you were profiting from it. You forged legal documents to try to steal our grandmother's home. You didn't even tell me you were selling it. Where was family loyalty then? He released my arm, his shoulders sagging in defeat. Marcus and I walked out into the rain together. He held an umbrella over both of us as we made our way to our cars. That was brutal, he said, but effective. Sometimes brutal is necessary, I replied. He's been coasting on family connections and other people's generosity his whole life. Maybe this will finally teach him some responsibility. Or maybe it won't, Marcus said, but at least you've protected what matters most to you. I drove to the cottage alone, the keys heavy in my pocket. The rain had stopped and afternoon sunlight was breaking through the clouds, making the wet leaves shimmer like jewels. The cottage looked different now that it was truly mine, not just in memory, but in fact. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, watching light dance on the lake's surface. Then I got out and walked up the familiar path to the front door. The key turned easily in the lock, and the door swung open with a creak that transported me instantly back to childhood. The interior was shabbier than I remembered, but the bones were good. The stone fireplace still dominated the living room, flanked by built-in bookshelves that held a few forgotten paperbacks. The kitchen needed updating, but the view of the lake through the window was exactly as magical as always. I climbed the narrow stairs to the bedrooms, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. My old room still had the same faded wallpaper, tiny rosebuds on a cream background that Grandma had chosen because she said it would help me dream of gardens. Jake's room across the hall was larger, something that had always bothered him about our arrangement when we visited as kids. Now it didn't matter. This was my house, my sanctuary, my responsibility. My phone rang as I stood in the doorway of what had been Grandma's room. Marcus calling. Ella, I just heard from Sandra. Jake's been calling her office asking about the trust arrangement. He wants to know if there are any loopholes. I laughed, though it sounded hollow in the empty room. Tell Sandra he can call all he wants. The trust documents are ironclad. If he wants his money, he pays what he owes first. It's that simple. As evening approached, I found myself on the front porch where Grandma used to sit with her evening tea, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and pink. The wicker furniture was gone, probably sold or taken by Jake, but the porch swing still hung from its chains, creaking gently in the breeze. I sat down and pulled out my phone to scroll through photos of furniture and decoration ideas. This place would be beautiful again. It deserved to be loved,
not just exploited. A car pulled into the driveway, headlights sweeping across the porch. I tensed, expecting Jake, but it was a sedan I didn't recognize. A woman got out, someone I vaguely remembered from high school. She walked up the path hesitantly. "Ella? It's me, Sarah Morrison. Well, Sarah Patterson now. I used to rent this place for summer weekends." I stood up, remembering now. Sarah had been a year behind me in school, always shy but kind. "Of course, Sarah. How are you?" She climbed the porch steps slowly. I heard through Sandra that the cottage changed hands today. I wanted to make sure. Your brother said I might be able to rent it again this summer, but now I'm not sure. I gestured to the swing beside me. "Sit down. Let's talk." She perched on the edge of the swing, nervous energy radiating from her small frame. "I plan to restore this place and continue renting it out, but I'm going to be much more professional about it than my brother was. What did he charge you?" $200 a weekend, she said quickly. "But I always paid on time and I took good care of everything. I kept receipts for any supplies I bought, cleaning products and such." $200 a weekend was robbery for lakefront property in prime season, and we both knew it. "Sarah," I said gently, "what did you pay my brother in total over the past 2 years?" She pulled out her phone and scrolled through what looked like careful records. $4,800? 24 weekends at $200 each?" I closed my eyes, doing quick math. At market rates, those same weekends should have brought in at least $12,000. Jake hadn't just been stealing from me, he'd been cheating his tenants too, keeping rents artificially low, probably to avoid questions or official rental agreements. "Sarah," I said carefully, "did my brother ever give you a proper rental agreement, or ask for references, or require a security deposit?" She shook her head to all 3 questions. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the last light fade over the lake. "Sarah, would you be interested in continuing to rent here under a proper arrangement?" Her face lit up. "Really? You'd let me keep coming?" "Of course, but I'll need to charge fair market rates, probably $600 a weekend. That's still below what comparable properties rent for, but I want to be fair to longtime guests." She nodded eagerly. "That's fine. This place is special. It's worth it." After Sarah left, I called the local utility companies to transfer services into my name. Then I called a cleaning service to come out first thing Monday morning. The cottage needed a thorough cleaning before I could think about renovations. I also called my assistant to arrange for some furniture deliveries. I'd be staying here for the next few weeks, overseeing the restoration work personally.
My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Can we talk, please?" I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Some conversations required more than text messages, and I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. Maybe I never would be. The hurt was too fresh, the betrayal too complete. I spent that first night in the cottage, sleeping on an air mattress in my old room, listening to the familiar sounds of the lake at night. Water lapping against the dock, wind in the pine trees, the distant call of a loon. These were the sounds of my childhood, the soundtrack to the happiest memories of my life. Jake had tried to sell those memories, tried to turn them into quick cash. But memories, I'd learned, weren't for sale. They had to be protected, preserved, cherished. Morning came bright and clear, with golden sunlight streaming through the dusty windows. I made coffee in the old percolator I'd found in a kitchen cabinet, probably the same one Grandma had used for decades. The coffee was terrible, but it was coffee, and I was drinking it in my grandmother's kitchen, in my family's cottage, on the shores of the lake where I'd learned to swim. Some mornings are perfect not because everything goes right, but because you're exactly where you belong. The cleaning crew arrived at 8 sharp. 3 women with buckets and supplies, and the kind of cheerful efficiency that promised good results. While they worked, I walked the property, assessing what needed attention. The dock was solid, but needed staining. The garden was overgrown, but salvageable.
The old tree house was still in the oak, though I wouldn't trust a child in it without major repairs. Everything was fixable with time and money, and I had both. By noon, the cottage gleamed from top to bottom. The hardwood floors shone, the windows sparkled, and the stone fireplace looked ready for its first fire in years. Furniture delivery arrived that afternoon. A comfortable sofa for the living room, a dining table and chairs, beds for the bedrooms, basic necessities that would make the place livable while I planned larger renovations. I was arranging books on the living room shelves when another car pulled into the driveway. This time, it was Jake's truck. I watched through the window as he sat behind the wheel for several minutes, clearly working up the courage to come to the door. Finally, he got out and walked slowly up the path, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. The knock, when it came, was soft and hesitant. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. We stood there looking at each other across the threshold, two people who'd once built snow forts and shared secrets, now separated by betrayal and broken trust. He looked older than his 34 years, tired and defeated. "Ella," he said quietly, "I know you don't want to see me, but I need to explain." "There's nothing to explain," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "You stole from me. You forged documents. You lied for 2 years. What explanation could possibly make that acceptable?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I remembered from childhood when he was frustrated or scared. "I know how it looks, but I was desperate. The construction work dried up last winter, and I couldn't find anything else. I was behind on rent, about to lose my apartment. The cottage was just sitting here empty, and I thought maybe I could use the rental income to get back on my feet. I never meant for it to go on so long."
"You thought the cottage was sitting empty," I said, anger creeping into my voice despite my efforts to stay calm. "Did you think to ask me? Did you think to discuss it with me before you started collecting money that wasn't yours? Did you think to mention any of this when we talked on birthdays and holidays?" His shoulders sagged. I was ashamed. I kept meaning to tell you, kept meaning to pay it back, but then there would be another emergency, another bill. "I know I screwed up, Ella. I know I hurt you, but we're family. Doesn't that count for something?" "Family?" I repeated, the word tasting bitter. "Jake, let me tell you what family means to me. Family means the woman who raised us Summers and taught us about loyalty and responsibility. Family means the generations of people who built this cottage and preserved it for their children. Family means honoring the past and protecting the future. What you did wasn't family, Jake. It was theft." He leaned against the doorframe, looking defeated. "So what happens now? Do you ever forgive me? Do we ever fix this?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "Right now, I can't even look at you without feeling sick. You didn't just steal money, Jake. You stole my trust. You stole my sense of security. You made me question everything I thought I knew about you. That's not something that gets fixed with an apology." The silence stretched between us, filled with the sound of wind in the trees and water against the shore. Finally, Jake straightened up. "The money in the trust," he said. "I'll pay back what I owe. It might take me some time, but I'll do it." "How?" I asked. "You don't have steady work. You're living paycheck to paycheck when you have paychecks at all. How are you going to come up with $52,000? "I'll figure it out," he said, with more conviction than I'd heard in his voice all day. "I'll get a job, a real job, and I'll make payments until it's paid off. I'll sell my truck if I have to. I'll do whatever it takes." For the first time since this whole mess started, I saw something in Jake's eyes that gave me hope. Not much hope, but a glimmer. It looked like determination, something I hadn't seen in him since we were kids. "All right," I said, after a long moment. "Here's what's going to happen. You pay back what you owe, with interest, as agreed. But that's just the financial part. If you ever want to have a relationship with me again, you're going to have to prove that you've changed. Not with words, Jake, with actions.
over time. Consistent actions that show me you understand the gravity of what you did. He nodded quickly. Yes, whatever it takes. I mean it, Ella. I'll do whatever it takes. I stepped back and began to close the door. Then prove it. Don't tell me you're sorry. Show me you're sorry. Don't promise you'll change. Actually change. And Jake, don't contact me until you've made the first payment to the trust. I need time to process all of this, and I need to see that you're serious about making things right. The door closed between us with a soft click, final as a period at the end of a sentence. From the window, I watched him drive away, his truck disappearing around the bend in the road. I felt empty and full at the same time, drained by the confrontation, but also oddly hopeful. Maybe Jake would surprise me. Maybe he would actually follow through on his promises. Or maybe he wouldn't, and I'd be disappointed again. But either way, I'd done what I needed to do. I'd protected what mattered most, and I'd given him a chance to earn his way back into my life if he really wanted it. That evening, I sat on the porch swing as the sun set over the lake, planning renovations and thinking about the future. The cottage would be beautiful again. I was certain of that. It would be a place where families could make memories, where children could learn to fish and swim and appreciate the natural world. It would be exactly what Grandma had always intended it to be, a legacy of love passed down through generations. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was my assistant calling from the city. Ms. Thompson, I have the contractor quotes you requested for the cottage renovation. Also, there's been interest from a magazine wanting to do a feature on successful women who've returned to their roots. Should I schedule an interview? Send me the contractor quotes by email, I said, watching a pair of ducks paddle across the lake. As for the magazine, let me think about it. I'm not sure I'm ready to tell the story publicly yet. The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable routine. I worked remotely from the cottage, taking client calls from the porch and reviewing investment portfolios while contractors updated the electrical and plumbing systems. The work progressed faster than I'd expected, and within a month, the cottage was transformed. New appliances in the kitchen, updated bathrooms, fresh paint throughout, but carefully chosen to preserve the character and charm that made the place special. I hired Sarah as my first official property manager, responsible for booking rentals and overseeing guest services. She approached the job with the kind of attention to detail and genuine care that Jake had never shown. Within weeks, the cottage was booked solid through the summer season at rates that reflected its true value. The income would more than cover the mortgage, property taxes, and maintenance costs, with plenty left over for continued improvements. 2 months after our confrontation, I received a letter from Jake. Not a text or email, but an actual handwritten letter delivered by mail. Inside was a money order for $800 and a note written in Jake's careful handwriting. First payment toward what I owe you. I got a job with Morrison Construction. Steady work, good pay. I know this is just the beginning, but I wanted you to know I meant what I said. I'm going to make this right. Your brother, Jake. I stared at the money order for a long time, feeling something shift inside my chest. $800 wasn't much against a debt of $52,000, but it was a start. More importantly, it was proof that Jake was actually trying. I called Marcus and arranged for the payment to be credited to the trust account, then filed the letter away in the cottage's old oak desk. Time would tell if Jake would continue making payments, but for now, it was enough to know he was trying. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came the first rental guests of the season. I watched from the garden where I was planting Grandma's favorite roses as a young family unpacked their car. 2 children, a boy and girl about the ages Jake and I had been when we first visited the cottage. They ran straight to the lake, their parents calling after them to be careful, to stay where they could be seen. The sound of their laughter carried across the water, bright and joyful and full of possibility. That evening, I received another letter from Jake. This one contained a $1,000 money order and news that he'd been promoted to crew chief at Morrison Construction. "The steady paycheck is making all the difference," he wrote. "I'm learning to budget, to plan ahead, to think before I act. I know I have a long way to go, but I wanted you to know that I'm different now. Not just trying to be different, but actually different. Thank you for giving me the chance to prove it." I calculated quickly. If Jake continued making payments at this rate, he'd have the debt paid off in under 3 years. Sooner if he increased the payments as his income grew. It was a reasonable timeline, manageable but not easy. It would require discipline and sacrifice, qualities Jake had never shown much of in the past. But maybe, just maybe, losing everything had finally taught him their value. As summer progressed, the cottage became exactly what I'd envisioned, a place where memories were made and treasures preserved. Families returned year after year, children growing taller each season, parents relaxing into the rhythm of lake life. I installed a guest book where visitors could record their thoughts and experiences, and reading their entries never failed to make me smile. "Best vacation ever," wrote one 8-year-old. "This place is magic," added her mother. Jake's letters arrived monthly, always with a payment and updates on his life. He'd moved to a smaller apartment to save money. He'd started taking classes at the community college, working toward a degree in construction management. He'd been sober for 6 months, attending AA meetings twice a week. The changes seemed real, lasting, the kind of fundamental shifts that come from genuine commitment rather than temporary desperation. 1 year after buying back the cottage, I received a call from Sandra Mills. "Ella, honey, I have some news you might find interesting. Your brother came to see me yesterday. He wants to know if you'd be willing to sell him back a portion of the property. Says he has a down payment saved and wants to build something small on the back lot, maybe a cabin where he could live and help maintain the property." I was quiet for a long moment, processing this unexpected development. Jake wants to move back here permanently? That's what he said. Claims he's learned to appreciate what he threw away, wants to be closer to family and help preserve what your grandmother built. He asked me to approach you about it because he wasn't sure you'd take his call. That evening, I walked the property boundaries, considering Jake's proposal. The back lot was separate from the main cottage, screened by trees and far enough away to ensure privacy for rental guests. It would be big enough for a small cabin, and having someone on the property year-round would certainly be helpful for maintenance and security. But could I trust Jake to follow through on his commitments? Could I risk the peace I'd found here?
I called Marcus to discuss the legal implications. If Jake were to purchase a portion of the property, we'd need clear agreements about his responsibilities and limitations. No involvement in the rental business without my explicit permission. No claim to the main cottage or its income. Specific obligations regarding property maintenance and upkeep. "It's doable," Marcus said, "but complicated. Are you sure you want to tie yourself to him legally after everything that's happened?" I wasn't sure of anything, which is why I decided to take the direct approach. I called Jake for the first time since our confrontation at the cottage door. His voice was cautious when he answered. "Ella, is everything okay? I heard from Sandra Mills that you're interested in buying part of the cottage property," I said without preamble. "Is that true?" "Yes," he said quietly. "I know it probably sounds crazy after everything that happened, but I've been thinking about it for months. I miss being near the lake, near the place where we grew up, and I thought maybe if I had a stake in preserving it, a real stake, it might help convince you that I've really changed." His voice grew stronger as he spoke. "I have $12,000 saved for a down payment, and Morrison Construction said they'd help me build something small and simple. I'm not trying to take anything away from you, Ella. I just want to be part of something good again."
We talked for over an hour, the longest conversation we'd had in years. Jake told me about his job, his classes, his AA meetings, his gradual climb back to respectability. I told him about the cottage renovations, the successful rental business, the joy I'd found in preserving our family's legacy. By the end of the call, I found myself cautiously optimistic about the possibility of healing our relationship. "I'll consider it," I told him finally. "But Jake, this would be a huge step. If we do this, if I sell you that land, you'd be living 10 minutes away from me. We'd have to find a way to be family again. Really family, not just people who share DNA and hurt feelings. Are you ready for that kind of commitment?" "I've been ready for months," he said. "I just wasn't sure you'd ever give me the chance." I spent the next week thinking, weighing the risks against the potential rewards. Jake had been consistent with his payments for over a year, never missing a month, often including more than the minimum required. His letters had evolved from desperate apologies to genuine updates on his life and progress. Sarah, who knew him from high school, said the few times she'd seen him around town, he seemed different, more mature, more focused. Finally, I made my decision. I called Jake and asked him to meet me at the cottage the following Saturday afternoon. When he arrived, I was waiting on the porch with a folder full of documents and a thermos of iced tea. He looked nervous but hopeful, dressed in clean jeans and a button-down shirt, his hair recently cut. "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the chair beside the swing. "We need to talk through some things." I opened the folder and pulled out a survey map of the property. "This is what I'm willing to consider," I said, outlining the back lot with my finger. 2 acres, enough for a small cabin and some privacy. You'd have access to the lake, but no claim to the dock or the main beach area. Those stay with the cottage for rental guests.
Jake studied the map intently. "What would you want for it?" "50,000, I said. "Fair market value based on recent comparables. You can finance it however you want, but I want a substantial down payment and a clear understanding of what happens if you default." He nodded slowly. "I can do 20,000 down, finance the rest through the bank. Would you be willing to hold a second mortgage for part of it?" We spent the rest of the afternoon working through the details. Jake would purchase the land but couldn't build on it until he'd paid off his debt to the trust in full. Once construction began, he'd have 18 months to complete a modest cabin meeting all local building codes and environmental regulations. He'd be responsible for his own utilities but could share the driveway and contribute to its maintenance. Most importantly, we established clear boundaries for our relationship going forward. Jake would be my neighbor, not my business partner. He could help with property maintenance if I requested it, but the rental business remained solely mine. Any disputes would be handled through mediation, not family arguments. We were starting over, building something new on the foundation of what we'd once been. As the sun set over the lake that evening, we sat on the porch in comfortable silence for the first time in years. "Grandma would be happy," Jake said finally. "She always wanted us to take care of this place together." "She'd be happy that we're taking care of each other," I replied. The place was always just the excuse to bring family together. The paperwork took 6 weeks to complete, but by late fall, Jake owned 2 acres of lakefront property and had clear plans to build his cabin the following spring. He'd also made his final payment to the trust, 18 months ahead of schedule. The day Marcus called to confirm the debt was satisfied in full, Jake and I celebrated with dinner at the diner in town where we'd eaten countless meals as children. "I know I can't undo what I did," Jake said over coffee and pie, "but I want you to know that losing your trust was the worst consequence of my actions. Worse than the debt, worse than almost losing the cottage, worse than everything else combined. I never want to feel that way again." My brother sold our family home until he learned I'd already bought it back. Continuation. "Good," I said, setting down my coffee cup with deliberate precision. The weight of those months of betrayal, planning, and cold calculation settled between us like a physical presence. Jake looked smaller somehow, deflated by the reality of consequences he'd never bothered to imagine. The diner around us buzzed with the comfortable noise of small-town life, conversations about weather and local gossip, the clink of silverware against plates, the hiss of the coffee machine. Normal sounds for a normal evening, except nothing about this moment felt normal. I was sitting across from my brother, watching him grapple with the fact that his own greed had handed me the perfect weapon against him. "What happens now?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He'd aged years in the past few hours, lines appearing around his eyes that I'd never noticed before. I mean, with us, with the family. I studied his face, searching for signs of genuine remorse beneath the shock and fear. "That depends entirely on you, Jake. This isn't just about money, though the financial betrayal was bad enough. You tried to steal our childhood home. You forged documents. You lied to my face for months." I paused, letting the full weight of his actions settle. "The question is, what are you going to do to make this right?" Jake's hands trembled as he reached for his water glass. "I know I messed up, Ella. I know I hurt you. But I was desperate. The construction work dried up last winter and I couldn't find anything steady. I was behind on rent, about to lose my apartment. When I saw how much the house was worth..." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "You thought you'd steal from me to solve your problems," I finished for him. "You thought I was too busy with my successful career to notice or care about our family home. You thought wrong on both counts." The silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of broken trust and shattered assumptions. Finally, Jake spoke again, his voice hoarse. "How long have you known?" "About the forged documents, since the day you listed the house. About you collecting rent money. I suspected something was off when you kept deflecting my questions about the property, but I had it confirmed this afternoon." I pulled out my phone and showed him a spreadsheet my forensic accountant had prepared. 18 months of rental income, Jake. $23,000 that should have been split between us that you pocketed while lying to my face about the house sitting empty. Jake stared at the numbers on my screen, his face growing paler. "I was going to pay it back. I kept meaning to tell you, but there was always another emergency, another bill. I got in deeper than I meant to." "Intentions don't pay back stolen money," I said, sliding the stolen baffle into my purse. "Actions do. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign over your half of the house to me at fair market value, $200,000. But you're not getting that money until you pay back every penny you stole, plus interest and penalties. Consider it a very expensive lesson in why stealing from family is a terrible idea." Jake's eyes widened. "But if I have to pay back $23,000 before I can access the sale proceeds, and after agent fees and closing costs, I'll barely walk away with anything." "That's not my problem. You created this situation when you decided to commit fraud." I leaned back in my chair, feeling oddly calm despite the magnitude of what was happening. "You have two choices, Jake. Accept my terms, or I withdraw my offer, and you can explain to a judge why you forged legal documents and embezzled rental income. I'm sure the criminal courts will be very understanding about your financial difficulties." The threat wasn't idle, and we both knew it. Jake had always been the charmer, the one who talked his way out of trouble with a smile and a promise to do better next time. But this wasn't about charm or personality. This was about legal documents and financial crimes, things that couldn't be sweet-talked away. "You'd really send your own brother to jail?" Jake asked, and for the first time I heard real fear in his voice. "You'd really steal from your own sister?" I countered. "Don't make this about family loyalty, Jake. You gave up the right to that argument when you decided to forge documents and embezzle money." Jake slumped in his chair, the fight going out of him all at once. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to grow up," I said simply. "I want you to take responsibility for your actions and make things right. I want you to get a job, a real job, not another get-rich-quick scheme, and pay back what you owe. I want you to prove that somewhere under all this selfishness and poor judgment, there's still the brother I used to know." Over the next hour, we worked out the details. Jake would sign the house transfer documents immediately, but the proceeds would go into an escrow account managed by my attorney. He'd receive access to the money only after paying full restitution for the stolen rental income, plus a hefty penalty for the legal and accounting costs he'd forced me to incur. "There's one more thing," I said as we prepared to leave the diner. "You're going to apologize to Mom and Dad. Not just a casual, sorry things got complicated, but a full explanation of what you did and why. They deserve to know the truth about why their son tried to steal their daughter's inheritance. Jake winced. Do we have to involve them? They're going to be so disappointed. They're going to be disappointed either way when they find out. The question is whether they hear it from you, taking responsibility, or from me after you forced me to handle this through the courts. I stood up, leaving money on the table for my coffee. Disappointment from honesty hurts less than disappointment from deception. You should have learned that by now. As we walked out into the cool evening air, Jake caught my arm. Ella, wait, I know you have every right to hate me right now, but are we going to be okay? Eventually, I mean. Can we come back from this? I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since this nightmare began. Beneath the shame and fear, I could see traces of the little boy who used to follow me around, who'd cry when I got hurt, who'd shared his Halloween candy with me, even when I'd been mean to him earlier. That person was still in there somewhere, buried under years of bad choices and misguided priorities. I don't know, I said honestly. Ask me again when you've paid back every penny and proven you've learned something from this mess. Maybe we can rebuild trust, or maybe too much damage has been done. But Jake, I paused, meeting his eyes directly, this is your one chance. There won't be another. The legal proceedings moved quickly after that. Jake signed the transfer documents without further protest, officially making me the sole owner of our childhood home. My attorney set up the escrow account and payment schedule, ensuring that Jake couldn't access his share of the sale proceeds until all debts were satisfied. There's one more thing, I said as we prepared to leave the diner. You're going to apologize to Mom and Dad. Not just a casual, sorry things got complicated, but a full explanation of what you did and why. They deserve to know the truth about why their son tried to steal their daughter's inheritance. Jake winced. Do we have to involve them? They're going to be so disappointed. They're going to be disappointed either way when they find out. The question is whether they hear it from you, taking responsibility, or from me after you forced me to handle this through the courts. I stood up, leaving money on the table for my coffee. Disappointment from honesty hurts less than disappointment from deception. You should have learned that by now. As we walked out into the cool evening air, Jake caught my arm. Ella, wait. I know you have every right to hate me right now, but are we going to be okay? Eventually, I mean. Can we come back from this? I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since this nightmare began. Beneath the shame and fear, I could see traces of the little boy who used to follow me around, who'd cry when I got hurt, who'd shared his Halloween candy with me, even when I'd been mean to him earlier. That person was still in there somewhere, buried under years of bad choices and misguided priorities. I don't know, I said honestly. Ask me again when you've paid back every penny and proven you've learned something from this mess. Maybe we can rebuild trust, or maybe too much damage has been done. But Jake, I paused, meeting his eyes directly, this is your one chance. There won't be another. The legal proceedings moved quickly after that. Jake signed the transfer documents without further protest, officially making me the sole owner of our childhood home. My attorney set up the escrow account and payment schedule, ensuring that Jake couldn't access his share of the sale proceeds until all debts were satisfied. The hardest part was the conversation with our parents. They drove up from their retirement community in Florida, confused and hurt by the cryptic phone call Jake had made asking them to come. We met at the house, my house now, on a gray Saturday morning that matched everyone's mood. Jake, to his credit, told them everything. He didn't minimize his actions or try to shift blame. He admitted to the forgery, the embezzlement, the months of lies. Our mother cried silently, while our father sat in stone-faced silence, occasionally asking clarifying questions in a voice I'd never heard him use before. How could you do this to your sister? Mom finally asked, her voice breaking. How could you do this to our family? Jake had no good answer, because there wasn't one. He mumbled apologies and promises to make things right, but the damage was done. The look in our parents' eyes, disappointment mixed with something close to shame, was punishment enough for any crime. After they left, promising to call when they were ready to talk again, Jake and I stood alone in the empty house. The moving trucks had come and gone, taking away furniture that had witnessed decades of family memories. The rooms echoed with our footsteps and the weight of everything that had been lost. "I never meant for it to go this far," Jake said, his voice hollow in the empty living room. "I thought I could fix everything before anyone got hurt." "The road to hell is paved with good intentions," I replied, running my hand along the mantelpiece where our Christmas stockings used to hang. "You didn't think about consequences because you never had to. Someone always bailed you out, always made your problems go away. Well, congratulations. You finally found a problem too big for charm and excuses to solve." Jake left that afternoon, driving away in his beat-up truck with everything he owned crammed into the back. I watched from the front window as he disappeared around the corner, wondering if I'd ever see him again. Part of me hoped I would. A larger part wasn't sure it mattered anymore. The months that followed were strange and quiet. I threw myself into work, taking on new clients and expanding my investment portfolio with the kind of focused intensity that had built my career. The house sat empty while I decided what to do with it. Selling it felt wrong after everything I'd gone through to keep it in the family, but living there felt impossible with so many painful memories attached to every room. I started receiving payments from Jake about 6 weeks after our confrontation, small amounts at first, $200 here, $300 there, accompanied by brief notes explaining his progress. He'd found work with a landscaping company, manual labor that paid by the hour but provided steady income. He'd moved into a studio apartment, downsized his life to match his reduced circumstances. The payments gradually increased as Jake found better work and proved his reliability. He moved from landscaping to construction, then landed a position with a local contractor who specialized in home renovations. His notes became longer, more detailed, describing not just his financial progress, but his personal growth. He'd stopped drinking, started attending meetings, begun the slow work of rebuilding his character from the ground up. "I know this doesn't fix what I did," he wrote in one letter that arrived with a payment of $800, "but I want you to know that losing your trust was the worst consequence of my actions. Worse than the debt, worse than disappointing mom and dad, worse than anything else. I'm not just paying back money, I'm trying to pay back the faith you used to have in me." I filed the letters away without responding, maintaining the emotional distance I'd built as protection against further disappointment. Jake had hurt me too deeply for simple apologies to heal the wound. He needed to prove his transformation through sustained action, not words. The proof came slowly, in small increments that gradually built into something larger. Jake never missed a payment, never made excuses when unexpected expenses delayed his schedule. He sent updates on his job performance, his living situation, his efforts to make amends with our parents. The scattered, irresponsible brother I'd known was being replaced by someone more thoughtful and disciplined. 18 months after our confrontation at the diner, Jake made his final payment. The amount was larger than usual, the last of what he owed, plus interest, delivered in person rather than mailed. I found him waiting on the front porch of the house when I arrived for one of my monthly inspections. He looked different, leaner, more weathered from outdoor work, but also more solid somehow. The restless energy that had always marked him had been replaced by something calmer and more grounded. When he stood to greet me, his movements were deliberate rather than impulsive. "I wanted to deliver this personally," he said, holding out an envelope, "and to thank you for giving me the chance to make things right. I took the envelope but didn't open it immediately. How do I know this is really the end? How do I know you won't just find new ways to disappoint me?" Jake met my eyes steadily. "You don't. That's what trust means, believing someone will do the right thing even when you can't be certain. All I can tell you is that I'm not the same person who stole from you. That person was selfish and weak and afraid. I've spent the last year and a half becoming someone different." We talked for over an hour on that porch, the longest conversation we'd had since the night at the diner. Jake told me about his job, his apartment, his growing savings account. He'd learned to budget, to plan ahead, to live within his means. More importantly, he'd learned to think about consequences before acting, to consider how his choices affected other people. "I want to buy the house back," he said finally. "Not to live in, I know that ship has sailed, but as an investment property, something we could manage together. I have enough saved for a down payment, and my credit is slowly recovering. I thought maybe we could be partners instead of adversaries. The proposal caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on punishment and restitution that I'd never considered the possibility of genuine partnership. Why would I want to go into business with someone who stole from me? Because that someone learned from his mistakes and changed his life to make sure they never happen again, Jake replied simply. Because family business should stay in the family, even when family relationships are complicated. Because you gave me a chance to prove myself, and I want to keep proving it. I studied his face, looking for signs of the old Jake, the charmer, the schemer, the person who always had an angle. What I saw instead was someone who'd been genuinely humbled by consequences, who'd used that humbling experience to build something better from the wreckage of his former life. I'll think about it, I said finally. But Jake, if we do this, if we become business partners, it's going to be on my terms. Full financial transparency, equal decision-making authority, and the first sign of dishonesty ends the partnership permanently. Are you prepared for that level of accountability? I've been preparing it for 18 months, he said. Accountability is what I should have embraced years ago, instead of running from it every time things got difficult. As I drove home that evening, I thought about second chances and the courage required to offer them. Jake had paid his financial debt in full, but trust wasn't something that could be purchased with money. It had to be earned through consistent behavior over time, through proving that change was real and lasting rather than temporary and convenient. The house sat empty for another month while I wrestled with the decision. Finally, I called Jake and asked him to meet me at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory, for a conversation that would determine our future relationship. I've made my decision about your proposal, I said without preamble when he arrived. I'm willing to consider a partnership, but with conditions that go beyond what we discussed. Jake nodded, pulling out a notebook where he'd apparently been jotting down thoughts and ideas. I'm listening. First, you buy back a 50% stake in the house at current market value, not what you sold it for originally. The property has appreciated, and you need to pay fair market price. Second, all partnership decisions require unanimous agreement. We both have veto power over any major choices. Third, all rental income gets split equally, but all expenses come out before any distributions. No more creative accounting or hidden costs. I paused, watching his face for signs of resistance or calculation. Seeing none, I continued. Fourth, and most importantly, we establish a formal business structure with legal documentation. No handshake deals, no family assumptions about how things should work. Everything gets written down and signed by both parties. Jake listened carefully, occasionally making notes but not interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for several minutes, obviously thinking through the implications of what I'd proposed. Those terms are more than fair, he said finally. They're actually generous, considering our history. But I have one condition of my own. He looked up from his notebook, meeting my eyes directly. I want us to work with a family counselor as part of this process. Not because I think we need therapy, but because I want to make sure we're addressing the relationship issues alongside the business ones. I don't want money problems to destroy what's left of our family connection. The suggestion surprised me, but it made sense. We were proposing to bind ourselves together financially when we'd barely begun to repair the emotional damage from Jake's betrayal. Having professional guidance for navigating that complexity seemed wise rather than weak. Fine, I agreed. We'll work with a counselor. But Jake, understand that this partnership is contingent on you continuing to prove your reliability. One missed payment, one questionable decision, one sign that you're reverting to old patterns, and I dissolve the partnership immediately. Understood, Jake said. And Ella, thank you. For the second chance, for the accountability, for not giving up on me completely. I know I don't deserve your trust yet, but I'm going to earn it back. The legal and financial arrangements took several weeks to finalize, but by late spring, Jake and I were officially business partners in the ownership of our childhood home. We hired a property management company to handle rentals and maintenance, splitting responsibilities and profits according to our carefully drafted partnership agreement. The counseling sessions were initially awkward, two adults discussing childhood resentments and adult betrayals with a patient professional who guided us through the work of rebuilding trust. But gradually, we began to communicate more honestly than we had in years. Jake acknowledged the full impact of his actions, while I learned to recognize my own role in our dysfunctional dynamic. You enabled him for years, our counselor observed during one particularly difficult session. Not intentionally, but by consistently rescuing him from consequences and assuming he'd eventually mature on his own. Jake took advantage of that enabling, but he couldn't have done it without your participation. The insight stung because it was true. I'd bailed Jake out of financial troubles multiple times over the years, always with lectures about responsibility, but never with real consequences. In trying to protect him from his own poor judgment, I'd inadvertently prevented him from learning the lessons that might have prevented his ultimate betrayal. So, what do we do differently going forward? I asked. You hold each other accountable without being judgmental, she replied. You communicate directly about problems instead of letting resentment build. And you remember that partnership means neither of you gets to make unilateral decisions that affect the other. The house performed well as a rental property, attracting families looking for short-term housing during relocations and young professionals who wanted a quiet neighborhood without the commitment of buying. Jake proved to be surprisingly good at the business side of property management, handling tenant communications and maintenance scheduling with the kind of attention to detail I'd never seen from him before. Our first year as partners generated enough profit to begin considering expansion. Jake proposed buying a second property, a small duplex that would provide additional rental income while diversifying our investment portfolio. The proposal was well-researched and financially sound, a far cry from the impulsive schemes he'd favored in the past. You've changed, I told him during one of our monthly business meetings. This isn't the same person who thought he could solve money problems by stealing from his sister. That person was a child in an adult's body, Jake replied. It took losing everything that mattered to me to finally grow up. I don't ever want to be that careless with other people's trust again. As our business relationship stabilized and our personal relationships slowly healed, I began to understand that forgiveness wasn't a single decision, but an ongoing process. Some days, working with Jake felt natural and comfortable. Other days, I'd remember the shock of discovering his betrayal and feel the anger all over again. But gradually, the good days outnumbered the difficult ones. 2 years after our partnership began, Jake met Sarah, a teacher at the local elementary school who appreciated his newfound stability and commitment to personal growth. Their relationship developed slowly, built on honesty and mutual respect, rather than the passionate intensity that had marked Jake's previous romances. She knows everything, Jake told me when he first mentioned Sarah seriously. About what I did, about how we rebuilt our relationship, about the work I've done to change. She says she fell in love with who I am now, not who I used to be. Meeting Sarah confirmed my growing belief that Jake's transformation was genuine and lasting. She was warm, but not naive, supportive, but not enabling. Most importantly, she clearly saw Jake as he was, a man who'd made serious mistakes, but taken responsibility for fixing them. When Jake proposed to Sarah a year later, he asked me to be his best woman at their wedding. The request touched me more than I'd expected, representing not just forgiveness, but genuine reconciliation between siblings who'd almost lost each other to greed and betrayal. Are you sure you want me in that role? I asked, given everything that happened between us. Especially because of everything that happened between us, Jake replied. You're the person who refused to give up on me when I'd given up on myself. You're the one who held me accountable and helped me become someone worth trusting again. If that doesn't qualify you to stand beside me at my wedding, I don't know what would. The wedding was small and simple, held in the backyard of our childhood home, the house that had nearly destroyed our relationship, but ultimately became the foundation for rebuilding it. As I watched Jake and Sarah exchange vows, I reflected on the long journey that had brought us to this moment. 5 years earlier, Jake had tried to steal our family home out from under me, forging documents and embezzling money in pursuit of easy solutions to self-created problems. The betrayal had shattered my trust and nearly ended our relationship permanently, but it had also forced both of us to confront hard truths about ourselves and our family dynamics. Jake had learned that consequences couldn't be charmed away, that integrity was more valuable than quick money, that real security came from reliable character rather than clever schemes. I'd learned that protection sometimes meant holding people accountable rather than rescuing them from their mistakes. that forgiveness was possible even after deep betrayal, and that second chances were worth the risk when backed by genuine change. Our business partnership had grown into 3 rental properties and a small but successful real estate investment company. More importantly, our personal relationship had evolved into something stronger and more honest than it had ever been before Jake's betrayal forced us to rebuild it from the ground up. As the wedding reception wound down and guests began to leave, Jake and Sarah approached me with matching smiles and a small wrapped gift. "This is for you," Sarah said, pressing the package into my hands. "A thank you for giving Jake the chance to become the man I fell in love with." Inside was a framed photograph of our childhood home, taken during the golden hour when the setting sun painted everything in warm, forgiving light. On the back, Jake had written, "For Ella, who taught me that family means holding each other accountable with love. Thank you for refusing to give up on me." Looking around the backyard, where we'd played as children, where we'd fought as adults, where we'd ultimately found our way back to each other, I felt the kind of peace that comes from problems solved and relationships restored. The house stood solid and welcoming behind us, no longer a symbol of betrayal and broken trust, but a testament to the power of accountability, forgiveness, and second chances. Our business partnership had grown into 3 rental properties and a small but successful real estate investment company. More importantly, our personal relationship had evolved into something stronger and more honest than it had ever been before Jake's betrayal forced us to rebuild it from the ground up. As the wedding reception wound down and guests began to leave, Jake and Sarah approached me with matching smiles and a small wrapped gift. "This is for you," Sarah said, pressing the package into my hands. "A thank you for giving Jake the chance to become the man I fell in love with." Inside was a framed photograph of our childhood home, taken during the golden hour when the setting sun painted everything in warm, forgiving light. On the back, Jake had written, "For Ella, who taught me that family means holding each other accountable with love. Thank you for refusing to give up on me." Looking around the backyard, where we'd played as children, where we'd fought as adults, where we'd ultimately found our way back to each other, I felt the kind of peace that comes from problems solved and relationships restored. The house stood solid and welcoming behind us, no longer a symbol of betrayal and broken trust, but a testament to the power of accountability, forgiveness, and second chances. Some stories end with dramatic confrontations or perfect reconciliations. This one ended with something more valuable: the quiet satisfaction of work well done, relationships repaired through honest effort, and trust rebuilt one consistent action at a time. Jake had stolen our family home, but in fighting to get it back, I'd ultimately recovered something more precious: my brother, transformed by consequences into someone worthy of that title. The house was just a house, after all. Family, when it works the way it should, is forever.